Hey everyone. For this month's Book of the Month, I read Significant Zero by Walt Williams. This is a really, really good book if you want to get sort of more of an inside view of at least his experiences as a game developer. Not really a game developer, as like a publisher, and I guess he is kind of a developer as well. Walt Williams is one of the people that writes stories for the games. So if you had a game like, Half-Life or Spec Ops or like Monster Hunter, you have somebody that writes the overall story that game is kind of built around. Now, it's kind of weird to hear his experiences as writing because for me it seems pretty ass backwards the way it's done, where like the story is sort of written at the same time as the game is being done, and then you'll have to like do rewrites based on how the game development is going and based on like how random people are kind of feeling that day at your company. I mean, when I do when I write, I don't do it this way, and that's every writer has their own way of doing things, and this seems pretty unique to video games. I think the most talked about and probably the most praised game that he did is he was the writer for Spec Ops: The Line. If you haven't had a chance to like find out more about Spec Ops: The Line, its story is really amazing. It's basically Apocalypse Now, and well, he says it's a mixture of Apocalypse Now and Heart of Darkness. They're the same story basically, and it's really, really fascinating, and like the twists and turns in that are really cool. And he talks about that in the book, where it was like they had written their story, and they were well into like making the game at that time, and his boss like called him in and said, "We're missing something. Like the development of this game has gone on too long. We need to change it." And he was like, "Okay, great." So he goes into his office and he thinks for a little while, and it like comes to him, and he like comes back out. He's like, "I've got it. I know what we need to do. I don't want to spoil the game for you if you haven't played it yet." But it has to do with like the main villain and the mental state of your player that you're in, and a lot of that story and everything goes into how Walt feels about violence in general, and kind of how people they're not really becoming desensitized to violence, but it's sort of like it's becoming more accepted in society. And he readily admits that has absolutely nothing to do with video games, because in all honesty that's a bullshit argument. Yeah, both myself and from what I've read about his book as well, it's a bullshit argument to think about that. But he starts off this book by talking a little bit about his early life and everything. And I'm roughly Walt's age, and we had a very similar way that we went about experiencing games. Mine was a little bit different than his, but we both sort of grew up kind of cutting our gamer teeth on the NES and whatnot. Whereas I never really had a problem with a lot of the games that I played, especially when you talk about NES hard, which is just like, you look at some of the games now and you look at what NES hard was, and you're like, oh my god, why did you even keep playing these games? NES hard kicked his ass from just from reading this. For me, I also got my ass kicked by NES hard, but it was a little bit different. We both sort of got introduced to RPGs through like a friend of a friend, whereas mine was a little bit different because I got introduced into the Super Nintendo RPGs much later. I played the original Final Fantasy, and I played like some of like the more Western style, the dungeon crawler RPGs, but I didn't really get introduced to like what's considered to be the golden age of RPGs with the Super Nintendo. At least that's what I think it is, and some of my friends used to think that as well. I didn't get introduced into that until probably like the mid to late 90s, and I experienced a lot of those on ROMs instead of like playing the actual cartridge. I eventually would get the actual cartridges, but that's a different story altogether. He does tell one really funny story about his early life, where him and a bunch of his friends were going to. Well, they actually did. They stole a bunch of Playboys, and they were planning on like. For those of you that don't know Playboys, it's a magazine where a bunch of naked women are in it. I can't believe I have to explain that now, but I probably should. But him and his friends were going to like cut these Playboys that they stole up, and then they were going to like sell them page by page to the other kids in the school, which I never would have thought of growing up. That just seems so really bizarre, but they were going to do it, and then eventually one of their friends like ratted them out. But that was just like a really funny like side story in this that I found hilarious. But yeah, Walt got into writing like pretty early. Most writers sort of want to do this, want to write like all the time, and that was something that I did. I started writing very early, but this isn't my story. This is Walt. He started writing for like his college newspaper. He had been writing before this, but this is one part that kind of stuck out to me in the book. He started writing for an underground newspaper at his college. It was like a newsletter and everything. And he was doing this while he was going. I don't think he was going to the academy, but he was going to be in, I believe it was the Air Force, if I'm remembering this right. And he eventually went into a fraternity, and then eventually I don't really know how he got out of his Air Force like agreement or something like that. I think it had, I honestly don't, like that part didn't really make a lot of sense, but it wasn't really totally important for the story. From there he went to New York, and he decided he was just going to go all in on writing. And he had a few missteps along the way in New York, but eventually he called in a favor from one of his a couple of his fraternity friends, which is something that I never would have even thought about doing. And he eventually, and it really sounds like he just stumbled his way into getting a job at Take-Two Games, and from there it was like an entry-level job, and he just started eventually taking on more and more responsibilities, and eventually start writing more games. And just as we move on to like because he does mostly AAA games, or at least he did in this book, the process in which he describes his work life really made me feel bad for him. Like I wanted to go inside the book and just like give this man a hug and like thank him for all the work that he was doing, because it just sounded so horrible. He was talking about drinking like 4 Red Bulls a day. He was talking about taking drugs so he could go to sleep, like legal drugs, not illegal ones. He was talking about just like drinking every night. And I'm like, oh my god, dude, like that's not a healthy lifestyle, man. Like not just drinking 1 or 2 drinks, but like getting drunk every night. At least that's what it sounded like. During his work on Spec Ops: The Line, he talks about how like his arms just went numb, like he didn't have any feeling in his arms. And he went and got a massage, and after the massage, I guess like it started raining or something, but he was walking down the street, and he got out of the rain, and like he just broke down and started crying, because he realized that massage was the first time he had like human-to-human contact in like 3 months. And it was just like, oh my god, dude, like why are you doing this to yourself? And I knew the game came out, but I was like, oh my god, I would have left. Like I would have not wanted to keep doing that. But it's really amazing reading this book and just reading all of the things that you have to do, like all the sacrifices he made to get this game published. One thing that he was talking about a lot, and I've read this, especially in the previous book I read about crunch time in the industry, and it sounds like the most miserable thing in the entire world. And that's, and I when I was in the Navy, I was on submarines, and I thought that was the worst thing in the entire world. But this seriously does sound so much worse than that. Like the only saving grace in crunch time is that occasionally you can like go home to your actual house and get away from work. but it even sounds like he wasn't doing that. Like some of the other people making these games, they weren't even going home. They were just sleeping in their offices, and so they could just constantly be working. And like he talks about moving during all of this, like just to get away from the office for a while. It just sounds like it just sounds like hell. And he even mentions that in the book where while he was making Spec Ops: The Line, he like said out loud, "I feel like I've died. Like I feel like I am actually dead and I'm in hell right now." Like he's the guy that's just rolling the stone up the hill, and every day and every night it just rolls back down, so he'll have to just keep doing that. I'm sorry, I can't remember the actual Greek's name at this time. It's just escaping me at the moment. But he talks about a lot of the friends that he has in the industry, like how they moved on from from Take-Two where he worked, and how some of them are still making AAA games, and some of them have like moved on to do more of the indie games and everything. And that's kind of where it's left. And like I really, after reading this, like I honestly, like I wanted to email a lot of the developers that I know and just be like, dude, seriously, thank you for making all of these games, because the shit that you go through just sounds absolutely crazy. But yeah, this is a really good book. I really did enjoy reading it for this month. So if you want to know more about the industry, this is from the publisher's standpoint, so you get a little bit more of a perspective than you do with Blood, Spot, and Pixels. That was more from the developer, and so you get a little bit more with the publisher here, so you get some more insight into what they do. And then then it goes back into more of like the developer as well, because in the book Walt talks about how he had to be the publisher's eyes and ears on the project and whatnot, and how there was a script for, I think it was a Family Guy game he talks about, that he basically rewrote, and the company that wrote it they were very pissed off. They were like, he's just trying to elbow his way in on our project, and yeah, that sort of thing. But yeah, if you guys want to know a little bit more about the industry, this is a great book to read it from. Like, I cannot thank this guy enough for sharing his story with us. It is really, really amazing. Anyway, I'm not sure what book I'm going to be reading for next month. I think I'm going to take a little bit of a break from like the developer stories. I'm probably going to move on to like something else that's more of like an issue within the video game industry. So yeah. Anyway. Check the book out if you want. It's a really great read, and I will talk to you guys later. Have a good night.